The original Resident Evil 4 was the first game in the franchise to introduce the action horror style of Resident Evil. Up until that point, it was all about survival horror, although each game did slightly increase in action. It wasn't until Resident Evil 4 that action became the main focus point. And that's because you had things like the over the shoulder perspective that allowed for more action oriented gameplay to be shown off. You also had quick time events, there were far more enemies per area that you had to deal with, and even the cinematic cutscenes had a whole lot going on. So, Resident Evil 4 was an action packed adventure that really changed what the franchise was traditionally known for, and now we have this reimagining that is scheduled to release early next year, and it's going to be fascinating to see what it is Capcom decides to do with it. Will they stay true to what the original brought and have this reimagining be an action packed adventure just like the original, or will they decide to mix it up a bit and make this more of a survival horror take on Resident Evil 4, taking inspiration from Resident Evil 3.5, which many of us know is the early concept of Resident Evil 4, where you had things like the Hookman coming out of paintings and chasing after Leon, and there were creepy dolls, and the atmosphere was really dark and eerie, and it looked like a traditional style Resident Evil game. If Capcom goes that route, we could be in for a significantly different version of Resident Evil 4. Whichever way they go, it will be fascinating to see what happens. However, I actually think it's possible that they will take a concept that they did in Resident Evil 8 and bring it to Resident Evil 4, especially considering how similar the two games are. And what it was that they did in 8 is that, for the most part, that game was action oriented. You would go around, you would kill several lichens and other creatures, but there was one part of the game that was completely focused around survival horror. And that was the second house, the house Benevenito, where it was nothing but survival horror. You went in there and it was eerie, it was creepy. You had these dolls, and at one point, like all the hallways would become like bright red or whatever. And at the end of it, you had the famous giant baby fetus that everybody talks about that chased after you near the end of that house segment. And that was really intense survival horror, while the rest of the game, for the most part, was action oriented. Resident Evil 4 could do something very similar, where maybe one of the three main areas, the village, castle, island, becomes nothing but survival horror focused. So, for example, maybe we get to the Salazar Castle in this version of Resident Evil 4, and it's all about survival horror. It's about, slow pacing and puzzle solving and just eerie vibes all around, and it's significantly different from what the original Salazar Castle was like. And maybe that's something that they do. Another idea is that maybe Ashley has playable moments in all three of these areas, and during her playable moments, that's where the survival horror theme comes in. So when we play as Ashley, it's really horror driven, while everything involving Leon is action driven. So those are some concepts that they could potentially do for this reimagining of Resident Evil 4. And I would actually like to see this happen, because I don't want the core foundation of what made Resident Evil 4 special to go away. I don't want it to be completely about survival horror now. Like, I still want it to be, for the most part, an action adventure, because that's what the original was. That's why it was so popular, is because it shook up what the franchise was really known for up until that point. And that's what made it so unique and well loved to this day, and by many, it's still the best Resident Evil. I want that action to still be there, but I also want a little more intensity with, some more horror segments. And I think if you were to dedicate one of the three areas, such as the village or the castle, and make that completely horror based, that would work. Or if you want to have Ashley be playable in all three of these areas, and she gets some horror intensity with her gameplay, that could work as well. I just want, for the most part, it'd be action, and then, do it that way. I think it could work, and I do think that that is a very likely possibility that they go that route, considering that 8 did it, and those two games are very similar in the way that they, look and play. We're going to see what they end up doing come early next year, but what would you like to see? Would you like to see 4 remain action oriented? Do you want a more horror based style to be introduced? Or would you like to see like what I'm suggesting here, and they have like a very specific moment where this is where it's going to be all about survival horror now? Let me know. I'm going to go ahead and end this video here, and I shall see you all on the next one. See ya then.